August 1974. In West Pittston, Pennsylvania, the Smurl family believed they had finally found peace. A simple house surrounded by quiet neighbors seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. But within the first weeks, subtle signs appeared. Scratches on the walls, metallic sounds in the pipes, a cold draft in closed rooms. What seemed like structural defects hid something else, a silent invitation to hell. Nights soon became restless. Janet heard footsteps in the attic, even when everyone was asleep. The stench of rot appeared without cause, clinging to curtains and clothes. Jack, exhausted, tried fixing heaters and pipes, but nothing worked. It was as if the house had a will of its own, responding to human attempts with new provocations. The home, once promising, revealed itself as an invisible prison. At first, the family believed in coincidences, but doubt turned to terror when objects began moving on their own. Plates crashed in the kitchen, radios blasted at full volume in the middle of the night, crucifixes turned upside down. The daughters woke up screaming, claiming they felt cold hands pulling their blankets. With each new phenomenon, the sense of invasion became unbearable. Jack was the first to suffer clear physical attacks. One night, he felt himself being dragged from bed by something he couldn't see. He tried to resist, but an invisible force hurled him to the floor. Janet rushed to help and found deep bruises on his arms, like claw marks. It was then they understood they weren't facing a fleeting haunting, but something intelligent and cruel. The couple sought spiritual help. Priests visited the house and offered brief blessings, but the attacks soon grew stronger. During prayers, candles extinguished on their own and harsh voices mocked the chants with grotesque imitations. The evil seemed to feed on faith, turning every attempt at expulsion into an invitation for greater violence. The house was besieged by a presence that refused to yield. It was at this point that Ed and Lorraine Warren entered the scene. Already known for confronting dark forces, the couple accepted the Smurls' desperate plea. Ed, experienced in demonology, believed they were facing a high-ranking entity. Lorraine, upon stepping across the threshold, felt a suffocating energy so heavy she could barely breathe. She said immediately, "This is not a spirit, it's a demon." On the first night, Lorraine had a disturbing vision. She saw a black mass descending the stairs like living smoke. Behind it, a faceless figure with a distorted body watched with burning red eyes. Ed heard sharp pounding that shook the walls, loud as hammer blows. The couple realized the house wasn't just haunted, it had become the territory of an insatiable entity. The Smurls became direct targets. Janet reported being smothered in her sleep, unable to scream. Jack, desperate, said invisible hands pressed down on his chest until he nearly lost consciousness. The daughters cried after seeing figures standing at the foot of their beds. The demon wasn't limited to noises, it was closing in, testing limits, exploiting every emotional weakness of the family. Ed began recording the phenomena on cassette tapes. He captured groans, scratching, and a guttural voice that seemed to rise from the basement. Lorraine, in trance, described invisible chains wrapping around the house, as if it were imprisoned to serve as an altar. In her visions, she saw ancient pagan rituals performed on the land, sacrifices that stained the soil and attracted a presence capable of surviving for generations. From that point, the home ceased to be merely a stage for torment. It became a battlefield. Crucifixes burned on their own, walls pulsed as if breathing, and an intense cold gripped every corner. The entity assumed an almost tangible form, striking at the family's faith and even the Warrens themselves. What began as subtle signs now revealed itself as an open war against hell. By the fall of 1975, the manifestations had reached unbearable levels. The ceiling shook as if something enormous walked above it. The stench of sulfur invaded the bedrooms, soaking pillows and clothes. Janet began losing weight rapidly, claiming her energy was drained every night. Jack, increasingly worn down, became a shadow of himself. The once cheerful daughters now avoided the hallways. One of them claimed to have seen a crouched creature in the corner of her room, with a humanoid body and an animal's head. She said its eyes were glowing embers, and that it whispered promises of suffering. The child fell ill days later, with a fever no doctor could explain. For Lorraine, the true target wasn't the house. It was the children. Ed began sleeping armed with a crucifix and Bible, ready to face whatever came. One night, he heard the sound of nails scratching the walls, followed by screams that belonged to none of the family members. When he entered the kitchen, he saw all the chairs suspended in the air before crashing down violently. It was the first warning that they were dealing with an unusually destructive force. Lorraine's visions grew even more sinister. She saw chains piercing the family's bodies, binding them to the floor of the house as if they were slaves to something underground. In one trance, she described an abyss opening beneath the residence, with voices crying out in chorus. To her, the demon hadn't been attracted by chance. The house was a portal. The Smurls once again turned to the church. Priests entered, sprinkling holy water and chanting litanies. The response was immediate. Windows shattered, furniture slid across the floor, and a colossal shadow spread across the ceiling. The priests retreated, shaken, and advised the family to seek specialized help. Even the clergy admitted they lacked the weapons to fight this enemy. The demon began attacking in degrading ways. Jack reported nightly assaults where he was immobilized and violated by an invisible presence. Janet said she felt icy hands exploring her body, accompanied by obscene laughter. The Warrens documented everything in detailed reports, claiming the entity sought to break the family's dignity before destroying their faith. The manifestations were no longer limited to the house's interior. Neighbors began hearing screams from the walls, even when the Smurls were away. One couple reported seeing red lights pouring out of the windows like liquid fire. The house was no longer just the family's problem. The entire neighborhood felt the demon's presence. Ed intensified his prayers of combat, but every attempt only seemed to feed the entity's rage. Crucifixes ignited on their own, holy water boiled upon touching the ground, and words in Latin appeared burned into the walls, as if written by invisible hands of fire. Lorraine warned, "If we continue, he will kill us, but if we stop, he will take everyone." The couple now lived under constant threat. Lorraine fainted repeatedly, as if her energy were being drained during rituals. Ed was once pushed down a staircase, escaping death by inches. Even so, the Warrens refused to abandon the family. To them, retreating meant delivering the Smurls to hell itself. Winter arrived with brutal force. During a snowstorm, the demon manifested stronger than ever. The walls shook as if about to burst, and a colossal figure charged through the hallway, leaving scorched marks on the floor. Ed raised his crucifix and began an improvised exorcism. Lorraine fell into a deep trance, describing the enemy in horrifying detail. The war had truly begun. January 1976. After months of torment, the church finally authorized an official ritual. 3 priests arrived, accompanied by the Warrens, bringing crucifixes, relics, and ancient chants. The house seemed to sense the threat. The temperature plummeted, the ceiling cracked as if it might collapse, and a suffocating stench of sulfur spread through every room. The first verses of the exorcism echoed through the main room. At that moment, every light bulb exploded. Shards of glass flew like blades, striking walls and furniture. Janet fell to her knees, screaming that something was dragging her by the hair. Jack tried to hold her, but he was hurled against the table, splitting it in two. The entity was manifesting in full fury. Lorraine entered a deep trance, her tear-filled eyes fixed on the ceiling as she described a massive creature made of smoke and rotting flesh, with claws that stretched to the floor. She said there wasn't just one. An entire army was trapped in the same portal. The exorcism wasn't facing a lone demon, but a legion. Ed raised the crucifix and advanced down the hallway, chanting prayers aloud. The object burned in his hands, but he didn't retreat. The walls vibrated, frames fell, and a violent wind swept through the rooms as if coming from inside the very structure of the house. The stench of decay was so strong that many began to vomit. Suddenly, a heavy silence fell over the house. Then a thunderous roar tore through the corridors, as if dozens of voices screamed at once. The ground shook, cracks opened in the floor, and a colossal shadow rose behind Jack, pinning him against the wall. Lorraine cried out, "Don't look into its eyes! That's how it enters the soul!" The youngest priest collapsed to the ground in convulsions, while the demon seemed to laugh. Ed rushed to help him, but was thrown against the door with inhuman force. Lorraine, still in trance, began reciting ancient prayers in Aramaic. The entity recoiled for a moment, shrieking as if struck by invisible blades. The priests resumed the ritual with greater intensity. Their voices rose in Latin, clashing against the blasphemies echoing from the walls. The windows burst open violently, letting snow pour inside. The entire room spun in chaos as the family clutched desperately to any sacred symbol they could find. The air itself seemed ready to split apart. Suddenly, the shadow took physical form. A towering, distorted body covered in blackened skin and burning eyes. Each step made the floor vibrate. It raised its arms as if to crush everyone there. That was when Ed, bleeding and staggering, held the crucifix up to the creature and shouted, "You don't belong in this place." The confrontation was brutal. The demon lunged forward, and the crucifix began glowing with blinding intensity. The walls wept a dark liquid, and screams echoed from inside the pipes like imprisoned voices. Lorraine, still in trance, cried out, "He's trying to deceive us. He wants us to believe he's invincible." The ritual continued, every word striking at the shadow like a blade. At the height of the ritual, the shadow let out a scream so sharp that the remaining windows shattered into pieces. Its deformed body convulsed, dissolving into smoke and flames. The entire room was swept by an explosion of freezing wind. When silence returned, the air felt lighter. The demon had retreated, but everyone knew it wasn't destroyed, only contained. In the days following the exorcism, the house finally seemed at peace. Silence reigned, the odors had vanished, and the daughters could sleep without screaming through the night. Jack and Janet breathed in relief, believing the battle was over. But Ed warned, "When a demon retreats, it's never surrender. It waits for the next breach." Neighbors began to talk. Some claimed they had seen red lights coming from the house on the night of the ritual. Others swore they heard screams that didn't come from human voices. The family, already fragile, became the target of suspicious glances. Many saw them as cursed. Their social life crumbled while the burden of fear lingered. The Smurl daughters, though calmer, still had recurring nightmares. They dreamed of the creature watching from the corner of the room, even after the apparent victory. Janet woke up with the sensation of cold hands gripping her arms. For Lorraine, this was not imagination. These were echoes of a presence that still lingered, an invisible mark that would not disappear easily. Ed reviewed the tapes recorded during the rituals. On one of them, he clearly heard a guttural voice whispering in Latin, "Non exierim, I did not leave." The recording confirmed his fears. The evil was still present. He decided not to show the children, but warned Jack and Janet to keep crucifixes and constant prayer in the house. Meanwhile, the media discovered the case. Local newspapers began publishing sensationalist headlines, calling the Smurls' home the dwelling of hell. Reporters crowded the street, interviewing neighbors and photographing the windows. The family felt exposed. Their pain turned into spectacle. The demon no longer needed to attack. Public curiosity was already destroying them from within. The church remained cautious. Some priests declared there was no definitive proof of possession. Others defended the Smurls, arguing that the ritual had been real and necessary. This divide infuriated Ed, who accused the clergy of negligence. Lorraine, meanwhile, insisted that the church's hesitation only strengthened the evil. Inside the house, smaller phenomena still occurred. Quick knocks, fleeting shadows, the cracking of wood in the middle of the night, small reminders that the war wasn't over. Lorraine claimed the demon had been wounded, but not expelled. It was like a caged beast waiting for its chains to loosen. Jack began showing signs of mental exhaustion. Constantly irritable, he had sudden fits of rage without reason. Janet cried in secret, fearing the enemy was corroding not just the house, but her husband's very soul. Lorraine warned, "He's trying to divide you. The demon grows stronger when the family falls apart." To the neighbors, the Smurls became the subject of gossip. Some believed they were victims of real forces, while others claimed they had made it all up for attention. This disbelief deepened the family's isolation. Ed wrote in his diary, "This is how evil wins. It destroys the soul and ridicules the victims until no one believes them anymore." Even shaken, the Warrens promised to stay by the Smurls' side. Lorraine, though debilitated, said she still felt there was hope. Ed reinforced spiritual barriers, spread sacred symbols, and maintained constant vigilance. The war was not over. For them, the Smurl case was not just another investigation, but a terrible reminder. Hell never retreats, it only changes form. Months passed, but the silence brought no comfort. The evil seemed asleep, only watching. Jack lived in constant unease, waking in the middle of the night to check doors and windows. Janet prayed compulsively, fearing that any carelessness would invite the entity back. The daughters, increasingly withdrawn, carried fear in their eyes. In 1977, new disturbances returned to torment the house. Heavy footsteps echoed through the attic, foul odors once again filled the halls, and masculine voices called the girls by name. Lorraine described the atmosphere as an open wound that never heals. To her, the portal feeding the entity was still active. The family's mental health began to deteriorate. Jack experienced violent outbursts and episodes of amnesia. Janet showed signs of severe depression. The daughters lived under constant tension, often refusing to sleep alone. Ed warned that the entity didn't need to attack physically to win. It only needed to slowly wear down their hope until they surrendered. The neighborhood was divided. Some said they heard screams coming from the house in the middle of the night, while others mocked, claiming it was all made up. This division deepened the family's isolation. Ed wrote in his diary, "Hell doesn't need only pain. It also feeds on disbelief and the cruel laughter of those who watch." The press once again surrounded the Smurls. Reporters knocked at their door. Photographers tried to capture apparitions through the windows. The case became national news, but the exposure only increased the family's suffering. Janet confided in Lorraine, "It feels like the whole world is watching our destruction without reaching out a hand to save us." The Warrens insisted on reinforcing spiritual barriers. Ed brought relics, exorcised salt, and specific prayers to weaken the enemy. Lorraine, increasingly debilitated by her visions, warned that the evil was adapting. She said she felt the entity learning from each ritual, as if testing their defenses in order to return stronger. By the end of the decade, the Smurls decided to move. Their hope was that distance would break the bond. The new house brought brief relief, but smaller phenomena continued to haunt them: fleeting shadows, unexplained noises, shared nightmares. Lorraine explained that the link wasn't with the walls, but with the people. They had been marked. The case began to be studied by other paranormal researchers. Some believed it was a matter of collective hysteria, while others defended the authenticity of the accounts. For Ed, the debate was irrelevant. While they argue whether it's real, families are being destroyed. The demon doesn't need witnesses, only victims. Years went by, but the memory of terror never left the Smurls. Every move, every attempt to rebuild their lives was accompanied by the shadow of the past. For Janet, the greatest torment was no longer the invisible enemy, but the certainty that no one would ever fully believe what they had lived through. For the Warrens, the Smurl case was a turning point. Lorraine carried the visions for the rest of her life, saying the shadow still followed her in dreams. Ed admitted he had never felt such resistance from an entity before. Both understood. The case had not ended in West Pittston. It had only shown the world that some battles cannot be won, only endured. In the 1980s, the Smurl family still lived with echoes of the past. Shared nightmares, unexplained illnesses, and a constant feeling of being watched followed them. Even far from West Pittston, the evil seemed to scratch at the walls of any house where they tried to settle. It was as if the shadow had claimed the family as its own. Ed and Lorraine remained close, visiting whenever the disturbances returned. For the couple, the Smurl case was a cruel reminder. Some demons do not accept expulsion. They only retreat and feed in silence, waiting for moments of weakness. Each reunion with the family revealed new signs of spiritual wounds that never healed. The daughters grew up but carried invisible scars. They reported constant anxiety, insomnia, and an irrational fear of the dark. Janet admitted she never managed to sleep peacefully again. For her, the presence could be in any room, in any city. It was the certainty that her entire life would be haunted by memories that never aged. The church never officially recognized the case, maintaining an uncomfortable silence. This abandonment corroded the family's faith even further, leaving them with the sense that they were fighting alone against something much greater. Lorraine said this was the demon's true triumph, destroying trust in what was supposed to protect them. While critics called the Warrens opportunists, Ed reminded them, it doesn't matter if people believe. What matters is that this family lived in hell. He kept the most disturbing recordings, voices, screams, blasphemies, as proof he considered undeniable. For him, the Smurl case was a warning that evil could live next door to anyone. Lorraine, in turn, carried recurring visions of the creature. In her dreams, she still saw it leaning against a doorway, with glowing red eyes and a mocking smile. Each time she awoke, she felt the same. The demon had not been defeated. It was only watching, patient, like a hunter who knows its prey well. Time moved on, but the case never disappeared from occult archives. It became the subject of books, debates, and lectures. Some considered it collective hysteria. Others saw it as the most brutal account of modern demonic harassment. Ed said theories didn't matter because truth wasn't measured in belief, but in the scars of those who survived. The house in West Pittston still stands, renovated and occupied by other residents over the years. None stayed for long. Discreet reports of shadows, strange odors, and restless nights continued. It was as if the house rejected any attempt at normalcy, keeping alive its reputation as a stage for hell. For the Smurls, the greatest horror wasn't just the physical or spiritual attack, but the eternal doubt. They lived trapped between two worlds, victims to some, frauds to others. They carried this burden until the end of their lives, never truly finding peace. The demon had not only hurt them, it had stolen their credibility, their faith, and their tranquility. The Smurl case remains one of the most violent battles ever faced by Ed and Lorraine Warren. A story where victory was never absolute, and where evil was not destroyed, only dispersed. A dark reminder that some houses are not homes, but arenas, and that certain enemies never disappear. They only wait, invisible in the silence of darkness.